One of the things you'll want to be able to do is to edit and save your own system preferences. If you go to Edit on the top menu and select Preferences, it will bring up a large tabbed dialog box. On this box, you set the values of various defaults that are used by the program. For example, if you look at the confidence level radio buttons, it currently is set to 95%, which says to the program, whenever you create a confidence interval or a prediction interval, make them 95% intervals. If you'd rather have 99% intervals, you can change that. You'll see a setting for significant digits. By default, whenever Statgraphics outputs a numerical result, it will give you 6 significant figures in the output. Well, there are times at which you may want more, so you can set it to 7 or 8 or something like that if you like. There's an option near the top for displaying years. Typically when Statgraphics shows a year, it shows it with just the last 2 digits, but you can request 4-digit years instead. There's an option over toward the right for whether Statgraphics should highlight important results in its statistical tables in a particular special color. By default, it outputs the important results in red. You can take away the highlighting if you want, or if you like, you can even change it to a different color. The Eda tab specifies settings for doing exploratory data analysis. Some of the important settings here are the Histogram Rule. That is the rule that will be used to determine how many bars there are in a histogram by default. The method for fitting a line on a normal probability plot. Whether or not your box plots have outlier symbols, show outside points automatically. Otherwise, the whiskers will go out to the extremes whether or not there are outliers. In the analysis of variance and regression procedures, you can specify the types of intervals and multiple range tests you wish to use by default whenever you run one of those analyses. The Forecasting tab shows the different models that will be included by default in the automatic forecasting procedures. There are various types of trend models and exponential smoothers and ARIMA models that are normally considered. You can change those choices if you like. You can also change the information criterion that's used to select the best model. The Stats tab specifies the statistics that will be computed by default whenever Statgraphics calculates summary statistics. Over on the Distribution Fitting tab, you can specify the tests you like to run when you're testing data for normality or when you're just running a general goodness of fit test. For example, I know some people like to run the Anderson-Darling test. In the Capability tab, you'll see a list of different capability indices that can be calculated. Setting these tells the program, okay, whenever you do a capability analysis, compute these statistics by default. When you press OK, it's going to save your settings away. And incidentally, I call these sticky options. These options will now stay set until I change them again. If you do control charts, one of the tabs allows you to specify options for those charts. For example, you can tell the program, whenever you create a control chart, include inner and outer warning limits, or perhaps color the zones red, yellow, or green, depending upon how many standard deviations they are away from the mean. For runs tests on control charts, you can specify the number of observations on the same side of the center line or going up and down that will be considered an unusual run. If you do lots of survey analysis, lots of cross tabulations, you can specify the information that will be included by default whenever it displays a two-way table. In the case of graphics, you might like to specify a different type of surface or contour plot to create by default. In the case of gauge studies, gauge R&R type studies, you can specify the terminology that will be used in the output of the gauge study. Rather than using the generic term parts, for example, you might rather prefer that it said widgets. And finally, if you have the multilingual system, you can tell it what language you'd like to use by default. Incidentally, it's easy to share output from Statgraphics with people that speak other languages if you have the multilingual edition. Suppose I've created an output in English and I'd like to send it to someone who only speaks French. I can come to Edit Preferences, change the settings of these radio buttons on the Language tab, and when I press OK, the output will instantly change to another language. That's a handy feature only available in the multilingual edition.